The first time I saw my father-in-law cry was the day my wife, Alina, walked out of his resort for good at 19. Not real tears, just that tight, red-faced thing powerful men do when they realize the world isn't obeying them. I was 21 then, the nobody from Atlanta who'd gotten his perfect daughter pregnant and then, somehow worse in his eyes, married her. Now, 8 years later, I was back. Whispering Palms Resort and Spa glittered under the South Carolina lowcountry sun like it had been carved from money itself. White columned buildings, emerald lawns rolling down to the Atlantic, and the flagship Palmetto House rising like a wedding cake no one was allowed to cut without permission. Richard Hargrove had built the empire on his father's original 1978 vision, then spent the next 40 years reminding everyone he was the one who made it legendary. I parked my rental car in the staff lot at 7:48 a.m. on a humid Monday in June. Alina waited for me on the wide veranda of the main building, wearing a cream linen dress and the same calm, dangerous smile she perfected watching her father destroy people. "You ready, husband?" she asked, slipping her hand into mine. "I've been ready since the day he called our daughter a mistake." We walked in together. Richard was in the executive conference room on the third floor, holding court with his usual court of sycophants. At 74, he still had the broad shoulders and booming voice of a man who believed age was something that happened to other people. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy blazer monogrammed, and his eyes still carried that cold assessment that had made grown executives wet themselves. When we entered, the room went still. "Alina," he said, standing slowly, "you came back. I told you I would when the time was right," she replied. "Meet the new director of operations." I stepped forward and extended my hand. "Good to see you again, Richard." He didn't shake it. He just stared like I was a stain on his Italian loafers. "You've got to be kidding me." Alina smiled wider. "Not kidding. Marcus has run operations for 3 boutique hotels in Atlanta. He's good, better than good, and we both know you need someone who actually understands modern hospitality after the last 2 quarters. The silence stretched. One of the VPs coughed nervously. Richard finally took my hand, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "Welcome back to the family business, son. Try not to embarrass us." I smiled right back. "I'll do my best, sir." That was the beginning. 3 months in, I was already drowning in the usual corporate nonsense. Richard had given me the title, but none of the real power. Every decision went through him. Every idea was interesting, and then quietly killed. One rainy Thursday afternoon in September, I was in the basement archives looking for the original vendor contracts for the 2022 renovation. The space smelled of old paper and salt air. I pulled open a dented gray filing cabinet marked Founding Documents 1978 and started flipping. A thick manila folder had slipped behind the hanging files. The tab read, "Hargrove Family Trust and Executive Compensation Original Charter 1978, amended 1989. I almost put it back. Instead, I sat on the cold concrete floor and started reading. Page after page of dense legalese. Then on page 47, section 9, subsection D. Any blood or marital family member serving in an executive capacity for a continuous period of not less than 5 years who is terminated without documented cause shall be entitled to a lifetime revenue participation equal to 15% of the annual gross operating revenue of the flagship property, Palmetto House, as calculated at the time of separation. Payable quarterly in perpetuity in addition to any vested equity." I read it 4 times. My hands started shaking. I took photos with my phone, replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it, and walked upstairs like a man who had just discovered the map to buried treasure. That night in our temporary villa on the resort grounds, I showed Alina. She read it once, then looked at me with something ancient and hungry in her eyes. "He's never read the full charter," she whispered. "Grandpa wrote it. Dad just inherited it and pretended he built everything." She leaned back, eyes shining. "How long until you hit 5 years? 4 years and 9 months from today if I start counting my return." Alina smiled the way her mother used to smile when Richard wasn't looking. "Then we make him fire you on day 1 of year 6. The next 21 months were a masterclass in strategic irritation. I became the most competent, most professional, most quietly infuriating director of operations Whispering Palms had ever seen. I implemented new reservation software that increased direct bookings by 19%. Richard hated it because it reduced his ability to comp rooms for his golf buddies. I documented every safety violation in the aging spa building, politely, in triplicate, with photos. I stopped laughing at Richard's stories at the weekly executive dinners. I just smiled politely and asked data-driven questions that made him look unprepared. I arrived at 8 o'clock a.m. sharp and left at 5 o'clock p.m. sharp, never a minute early or late. In Richard Hargrove's world, that was rebellion. He started calling me the Atlanta accountant in meetings. Alina played her part perfectly, the dutiful daughter who had finally come to her senses. She hosted brunches, smiled at his terrible jokes, and slowly fed him the narrative that I was getting too comfortable and forgetting my place. Meanwhile, we kept perfect records. Every email, every performance review, the good ones I earned, the bad ones I documented as retaliatory. Every vacation request approved in writing. We were building a fortress of paper. Our daughter, Sophie, now 9, understood more than any child should. She'd seen how her grandfather treated her mother her whole life. She started calling him Mr. Richard instead of Grandpa. He hated it. We encouraged it. The trap was set for the resort's 50th anniversary celebration. We scheduled it for June 12th, exactly 5 years and 1 day after my return. Richard wanted fireworks, a black tie gala with 350 guests, celebrities, and every local politician who owed him favors. He wanted to stand on stage and remind everyone that Whispering Palms was still his. Alina and I made sure everything ran flawlessly, until 10:47 p.m. I was on stage giving the operations update, smooth, professional, data-backed. The audience was eating it up. Richard was seated at the head table, drink in hand, jaw tight. Then I said it. I'd also like to thank my wife, Alina, for her vision in modernizing our guest experience. Without her, none of this would have been possible. The room applauded. Richard's face turned the color of rare steak. He stood up, mic in hand, swaying slightly from the bourbon. "That's enough, Marcus. Sit down. This is my night." The room went dead quiet. I stayed standing, calm, professional. "Richard, I was simply acknowledging. You were grandstanding," he snarled into the mic, voice carrying across the ballroom. "Like you always do, strutting around my resort like you own it. You're an employee, you're the help." "You always have been," gasps rippled through the crowd. Alina rose slowly from her seat. Richard kept going, years of resentment spilling out in front of 350 witnesses, phones recording. "You got my daughter pregnant and thought that made you somebody. You've been a passenger your whole life, a well-dressed nobody riding my coattails. Well, I'm done carrying you. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out," he pointed dramatically. "Get off my stage and out of my resort." The silence was deafening. I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "As you wish, Richard." Security didn't even have to move. I walked off the stage, took Alina's hand, kissed Sophie on the forehead, and we left through the main doors while the entire room watched. Behind us, I heard Richard try to recover with a joke. It landed like a dead fish. The next morning, June 13th, Richard's lawyers sent a terse termination letter via email. No cause documented. Just at-will employment and irreconcilable differences. I forwarded it to our outside counsel, a shark named Victoria Lang who specialized in high-net-worth family disputes. Then Alina and I took Sophie to the beach and built sandcastles like it was any other day. 3 days later, we walked into the emergency board meeting Richard had called. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking hungover and triumphant. His inner circle surrounded him. Carol Whitaker, the only independent board member with actual spine, sat at the far end. I placed a single binder in front of each person. Section 9, Subsection D of the 1978 Hargrove Family Trust and Executive Compensation Charter, I said calmly. "As amended in 1989 by your father, Richard." Richard scoffed. "That's ancient history. Irrelevant." Victoria Lang stood. "It is very relevant. Your son-in-law has served 5 continuous years and 1 day in an executive capacity. He was terminated without documented cause on live video in front of hundreds of witnesses. The clause is ironclad." She slid across the calculation. 15% of Palmetto House's annual gross operating revenue. Last year, $41.2 million, 15%, $6.18 million per year, for life, quarterly payments, in perpetuity. Richard's face went gray. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "And so is the clause your father wrote to protect the family from exactly the kind of tyrant you became." Alina stepped forward then. The room held its breath. "You made my mother cry at every family dinner for 23 years, she said, voice steady. "You told me I was worthless when I got pregnant. You called my husband a gold digger while you paraded mistresses through this very resort. You belittled your own staff, your own family, everyone beneath you. And last night you did it on stage in front of the entire Lowcountry." She looked at him with something like pity. "Today it costs you $6 million a year forever. From the flagship property you love more than any of us." Richard tried to bluster. He threatened lawsuits. He screamed. He cried real tears this time. None of it mattered. The board voted 5-2 to honor the clause. Even 2 of his loyalists flipped when they saw the legal opinion. Richard fought for 14 months. He burned through lawyers. He tried to sell the resort to avoid the payments. The board blocked him. In the end, he had to liquidate personal assets to cover the first few quarterly payments. We moved to a quiet island in the Bahamas. Sophie thrived. Alina started a small foundation helping women leave controlling families. I never worked another corporate day in my life. 2 years later, we heard Richard had a stroke. He recovered enough to sit on his balcony at a much smaller house, watching the ocean he no longer owned a piece of. Sometimes late at night, I think about that rainy afternoon in the archives. One dusty folder, one forgotten clause, one arrogant man who spent his life making everyone around him feel small. And 2 people who waited long enough to make him feel it back, not for revenge, for justice, for the mother who cried at dinner tables, for the daughter who carried the weight, for the man who was never allowed to belong. $6 million a year every year for the rest of my life. Some golden parachutes don't open when you jump, they open when you're pushed, and they rain money on the people who finally learned how to fly. Epilogue: Richard Hargrove passed away last spring. In his will, he left Alina $1. She framed it. We still get the quarterly deposits. And every time the money hits the account, Alina raises a glass and says the same thing. To Grandpa, the only Hargrove who actually protected us. If you enjoyed this story, imagine what your own hidden claws might be. The tyrants always forget to read the fine print.